implies sort of the classic scientific method. I have a known hypothesis. Maybe I want to vary one thing and take 1,000 repetitions so I can tell myself that I'm 99% confident that that's the right answer. There's a place for that, and there's a place for that within the Pentagon when you're trying to support multi-billion-dollar decisions. So in place of data, in the gaming world, you could also substitute words like scripted, deterministic, things like that. And then all the way at the other end, so almost as you open that funnel or open that cone to get more and more insight, but less and less concerned about high-fidelity, rigorous data, you have words like insight, unscripted, non-deterministic, that kind of thing. So that was one sort of spectrum. The other spectrum we started to imagine was, where is the locus of intellectual capital? And what do I mean by that? That's a fancy way of saying who has the answers. So things like training, where I'm trying to, where I know what it is I want you to get out of this session. So the intellectual capital is here, and I'm projecting that out to you. So that would sort of be the bottom half of this, intellectual capital in here. And then there's that whole other realm of intellectual capital out there. And so what we started to realize with Mowgli, and this was also driven by a constraint. So one of the things I started to realize, and you guys on the panel probably know it, constraints are a designer's best friend. So we had two constraints. One was our O&R sponsor didn't give us a lot of money for this, and we didn't ask for a lot of money. The things we looked around at, like World Without Oil, were done pretty cheaply. And the second constraint was I'm I have to be careful when I say this, I'm kind of lazy, okay? So I did not want to be in a world where to put out a game, I had to become an expert in whatever that game was going to be about, okay? I didn't want to be in a situation where I was trying to, let's take Somali piracy, which is what we picked. I didn't want to become the world's expert on Somali piracy. What I wanted was a way to have a problem that I don't know the answer to, which sort of gets you in that intellectual capital out there, insight land. And in those cases, that's where things like collective intelligence, if you can sort of stand up and say, I don't have all the answers. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying that's where Mowgli lives, up in that upper right-hand quadrant. Okay. Yeah, so it's still there. These are some of the things we thought Mowgli could be used for. You're going to see some, I guess, some DoD-specific stuff in there. They're on that handout if you want them. And ultimately, our ultimate feeling on Mowgli is we probably need to do a Mowgli on Mowgli, because I think there's probably a bunch more uses for it. What I want to do now, and real quick, walk through sort of 5 aspects or features that we're after and that we're shooting for. So first off, and recognize again, we're in that insight and intellectual capital out there. Scale and diversity. So I think commercially, and a lot of the people in the audience, you're used to dealing in numbers, tens or hundreds of thousands. And the first thing is, from what we're trying to do with Mowgli, we use the word massive multiplayer, and it was a fun acronym. But we're happy if we're at about 1,000, maybe 5,000 players in a game. And remember, our frame of reference is a standard war game, maybe about 50 people. But what we're after is scale and diversity, and ultimately cognitive diversity. And what we think that gets us, and we'll find out more as we play this game, is 2 things. Outliers, so outlying thoughts, outlying opinions, more of them, recognizing there's some noise to signal we'll tolerate with that, as well as that cognitive diversity. That's the first half of collective intelligence as we're defining it for this project. Next one is an invisible hierarchy. I think it's fairly obvious, but what we're looking for is meritocracy of ideas, and ideas being played off of each other, not, I'm the heavyweight in the room and my ideas take precedence kind of thing. Next feature, who remembers this guy? Microsoft? Yeah. Okay. I'm not a Microsoft fan, but this works. So specifically, we wanted this to be open source, open, and I'm not a great computer guy, but all those open things. So we, on purpose, picked as our performers a not-for-profit and a government research place to actually implement this game. So Naval Postgraduate School, Monterey, California, committed to open source, open blah, 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 and Institute for the Future, which is a nonprofit. So at the end of the game, our intention, actually, let me just go to the next slide. Yeah, okay. That's where we want to go with this game. That doesn't mean we'll get there in this pilot. But ultimately, what we want for Mowgli is that we want to democratize the art of gaming for the common person. So our vision is you could wake up one day with a complex problem that you don't know the answer to, that you really need to get a lot of diverse opinions on, create your own game, put it out there for a bunch of people to play, and get some insight back. Once you have insight, then you can go collect all the data you want. Okay. Second half of collective intelligence is what we call knowledge accidents. So just having a lot of outlying thoughts is good. In and of itself, that's good. But what we're really after is the intersection of two ideas that never would have met up in space before and create a third idea. So this is like, I think, my favorite slide. So actually what this is, a bookstore up in San Francisco, California, that one day decided to rearrange their books by color. And you can see what happened to this guy. It's almost like he walked in and he's having a knowledge accident. So you go to the same habitual place in the bookstore looking for, business books or books on gaming, I guess. And instead you find a yellow book, new topic. So structure of the game, the way the game rolls, it creates knowledge accidents, and that's really what we're after. Last, we think it's ideal for wicked problems, complex problems. Honestly, I don't want to play Mowgli for things I think I know the answer to. We picked Somali piracy as an opening scenario simply because it's unclassified. And so for a first pilot, I wanted to stay on class. It's something everybody in this room knows about, something everybody out there knows about, so we could quickly and easily get a lot of gameplay on it. And I believe, this is just a quick, so this is like some screenshots from the game. Oh, it's not, sorry. I limited myself to the 5 minutes, but anyway, there's some videos out there on YouTube, and Chief of Naval Research didn't, so there's enough videos out there on how gameplay looks. We actually launch next Tuesday. I almost begged off today because we were supposed to launch 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I thought I'd have results to show you, but I don't, and I think I'm done. So.
Now, I'm using a Google presentation rather than a PowerPoint, and we might be a little challenged in getting it to start. And I can't really see anybody up there. Hey, there we go. Good. Now, whether I can advance it from here is another question. If your smartphones can read that QR code at the bottom right, you can watch this on your phone or your laptop with your webcam, or you can type in tiny.cc/RWIW-Y1. That stands for Real World in World Year 1. Now, this is a project that was funded through NASA's K-12 Cooperative Agreement Notices, and the specific purpose of our project was to create an engineering design challenge for secondary students in grades 9 through 12 to work with their teacher to solve a problem in what could be either a formal education environment or an informal education environment. And many of you may recognize the obvious distinction there, which is formal education is a classroom, and then informal education can be anything from museums to clubs to after-school informal settings. So we had a specific problem. Well, actually, we had 2 problems that students could choose from. One was to figure out how to get this very large reflective mirror of the James Webb Space Telescope into the existing intended rocketry necessary to get it to space. The mirror itself is much larger than than the diameter of the rocket, and that requires some folding or some other manipulations and then unfolding once in space. A second problem was to build a shield that protected the infrared lenses from all of the sun's energy, but also the reflected energy off the Earth and the Moon, so that the James Webb Space Telescope could actually read all these images from space. Now, this followed a typical engineering design challenge in which for those of you who know the engineering design processes, they typically begin with defining a problem. Then you get the criteria and constraints, and from there you start brainstorming solutions. You ultimately pick one, then you build a model, then you test the model, and this is very important and sometimes distinguishes it from traditional schooling. You get to redesign it. In traditional schooling, you often don't get to go back and fix the things that you got wrong or rethink it. And we believe that's a critical part of learning. And then sharing it with others. We like the idea that no project should have a product that's limited to that immediate audience of just the teacher and the student. And instead, it should not only be shared with that student's peers, but when possible, shared on the web for the whole world to see. So let's see. I'm skeptical that I'll be able to advance this. It worked. How about that? So that first slide you saw was the mirrors. This is the reflective shield. And we had two phases. Phase one was that formal education setting or informal education setting that was not what would be consistent with most of you are interested in here today. That in those classrooms we had 707 registrants, including 123 teachers, then a large number of students, 378 high school students, 101 college students, 9 university professors, 26 professional engineers and scientists, and then a bunch of others. And that was not limited to U.S. citizens. Phase 2, however, was. Is this really working, or are you guys just really smart and you see me go like that? Here's some of the outcomes of Phase 1. There are hundreds of these on our website that you can look at. So these are physical models that the students developed. Many students, however, use SketchUp or AutoCAD software and did much more advanced technical drawings and were able to do some modeling and simulation with those technical drawings. This later became very beneficial when the students were working in world. They had these drawings that they could turn into three-dimensional capacities that enabled them to test some things. In world, we used an Active Worlds platform, and here I like to say that I'm a fish biologist. I haven't taken a computer science course since 1983. I was largely driving some of the content with some of my colleagues, and we relied on some very skilled people to develop the in-world portion. In-world, we had 22 teams elect to participate. I believe 24 registered to participate, but the college students have to pick the high school teams they wish to work with based on the work that the high school students have published online. So the college students actually go read all their wikis and their blogs and their Google documents, and they actually pick the high school teams they wish to work from. So each team had a college team leader. It had a high school team of maybe 3 to 4 students. At this point, the high school teacher plays a much lesser role, and we have a professional engineer scientist working with each of these teams, guiding them through these processes. You can see our participation was across the country, nothing really from the West Coast or the Northwest, but otherwise pretty representative. From the universities, we had a lot of universities represented. I'll let you read the list and read it later if you like. And I can get you individual names if you wanted to follow up with any of these folks. And then we had some tech squad specialists. These are folks who were already familiar with Active Worlds, who facilitated the teams trying to do some very special things. And indeed, that happened. We have a 10th grader here in Arlington who unfortunately, some of the NASA engineers found some of his work to be a little fantasy-based and almost science fiction, but they invited him back in after the contest or competition was closed, and he is now designing a tour bot, so a robot that takes the evaluators through these in-worlds or these universes and guides visitors around, because his frustration was, if I had been there or been allowed to have been there to show you around our universe, you would have appreciated it much more. So he's now building a robot that does exactly that. There we go. So, of course, a big theme here for the K through 12 population, and specifically secondary students, is collaboration. We used a variety of Web 3.0, 2.0 tools to do that. We have a whole bunch of videos from NASA engineers talking about the importance of teamwork and how you need the innovative thinker, but then you also need that quick decision maker, and they need to police each other so that one doesn't get impatient and the other one doesn't like to brainstorm all day. And then you need folks who follow up with documentation and make sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And those of you who do psychometrics like DISC profiles and Myers-Briggs will recognize some of those qualities of team members. And then we use those tools. Specifically, we suggested tools. I don't know that you would say we recommended them. Sometimes we might have encouraged them when somebody had a specific challenge, but Wikispaces, Google Docs, and then setting up meetings through Meeting Wizard and Doodle, all these were important because the teams were all virtual. They weren't there in the same rooms working with each other. Then those 22 teams were narrowed down to 5, and because of a real close score at number 5, we actually invited 6 to go to this final round, in which they guide the evaluators in-world through a presentation. It's a fantastic thing to see, and I have a video here, and I'm going to play it later if we do have time. Out of courtesy to my colleagues, I want to make sure everybody gets to talk, and I'll show you snippets from this, and you see truly how authentic it is as a learning environment. And we were often very surprised. We also had guest speakers throughout the competition, and those guest speakers were senior engineers and scientists from NASA who came in world. They were interacting with the students in an environment that simulated much of what we're enjoying here today. And it was just fantastic to see how certain things just happened. We could never have scripted them, and everybody learned from it. If you click on that Team 5 Houston, Texas link, you must have loaded this a while ago. I made a change here when I saw that a previous group had problems with Vimeo. I now have a YouTube link on the actual presentation next to that. We're going to make some changes for next year based on what we learned this year. We were encouraged to expand it to middle school, so we'll invite 7th and 8th graders to participate as well. We're going to change the registration around to speed it up and to accelerate it from the beginning. And we're also going to have the scientists and engineers float. Some were underutilized, some were overutilized, and we want to give them maximum opportunities and share learnings from group to group. We're going to change the prizes around. This year's winners got a $1,000 scholarship and an iPad 2. And then change some of the interactions between the professionals and the students. Also next year, the problem will be based on Robonauts. Some of you have already heard of Robonaut 1 and Robonaut 2. They're already on the International Space Station. And the problem next year will be to design a zero-gravity foot for Robonaut 2 so that when it's working inside and outside the International Space Station, it enables that Robonaut to get all the leverage it needs, without doing any damage that may create even the slightest burr that could rip a spacesuit or a glove. And there's some contact information. I strongly encourage you to reach out to Sharon Bowers if you're at all interested in this. She and I work together on some of the, nearly all of the content and how the whole thing runs. Shelley Spears is a great person for talking to about partnerships. By the way, I need to mention a few important partners. USA Today was a very important partner in this. Margaret Corbett is just wonderful with Active World. She's been doing it for 10 years. She was formerly at Cornell, and she's run alternative universes for audiences more diverse than you can imagine. And she's actively engaged with us at the National Institute of Aerospace. And if you couldn't get it earlier, there you can scan that QR code for your phone. Thank you.
That's me. Hi, welcome everybody. You're all looking tired. I won't make you do any calisthenics, I promise. I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about myself and how it is that I became engaged in the serious games movement. My education was cognitive experimental psychology. I got out and was fortunate enough to find a job working in artificial intelligence-based training systems, decision support systems, and also human-centered computer design. That was what my educational background was, so I was lucky. I achieved what I wanted. And as soon as I started working, I was working to serve a lot of programs for the Department of Defense. And I really felt like, being the age I was, growing up with technology, I was walking into these incredible computer simulation labs where a server room the size of this stage here, this podium, was running an exercise. And there was another room down the hall with 100 people in it that were pucksters playing different roles to make that exercise run and to keep the engagement as real as possible. And we were doing a lot of really interesting work there. But I just couldn't get past the personal belief that I could do a lot of that with some of the games I grew up with. And I was fortunate enough to be thinking this around a time that some folks with money were also thinking it. So I was able to actually receive 2 grants, one from the Office of Naval Research to look at the use of e-learning technologies, really just advanced learning technologies, learning at a distance, and what it was like for our sailors, our soldiers, our airmen to really learn in distributed settings. And then followed that up with the DAR Wars program from DARPA, looking at how we could leverage games for training. So that's sort of what got me where I am today, and that's really where I'm going to talk to you from. All of that work was actually before I joined Breakaway, and I've been with Breakaway for the past 5 years, putting what I believe I found into practice. So the first thing that I want to say is, I really came here because I believe people have been using sledgehammers to hit tacks for entirely too long. And I think that we can come up with some very nice, elegant solutions by leveraging serious games. So I want everybody out there to think of their favorite game. Hopefully you all have one. It could be Monopoly. It could be World of Warcraft. It could be something else. But just picture what that game looks like, what that experience is like for you. And I'm going to show you, these are some of my favorite games. They're a little self-serving. They've all been created by my company. And they've all been created for defense customers or government customers. I like to use this slide to sort of help people reorient themselves from whatever they envision when they think of a game. Very often when we work with our customers, the decision makers are of an age where they may not be playing a lot of games themselves. So their best relation is their child who's home playing a first-person shooter or home playing some sort of online game. And they don't really know anything beyond that purview. So one of the things that I like to show is just how different serious games can look and how many different audiences they can serve. So if you just take a minute to look at this hodgepodge of images, we've provided clinical diagnostic skills training for medical professionals, medical residents, nurses, combat medics, civilian medics, all using a game-based, physiology-driven model. We have provided command and control C4ISR training for defense using 3D strategy games. I'll show you some folks who have used that in a minute. We have created games to help people learn complex political situations, learn how to better their way of life through strategic planning and thinking. We've created massively multiplayer environments for soldiers to learn what it's like to interact in another culture, to interact in another environment, particularly surrounding IED types of issues. Dental training games to help people learn how to do advanced dental procedures. Hospital management of suburban incidents. One of our current projects right now is working with Tatrick to develop a game that's actually intended to serve both the military and civilian market. They want to make sure that if a mass incident occurs, that we have both civilian and military facilities ready to work together following the same policies to handle that incident. So it's just sort of an idea of how these different things look. Some are first person, some are third person, some are 2D, some are 3D, some are a mix of both. So I just like to say, expand your thinking of what a game could be. So who's playing games? When I started this work, it was really the blue-haired freaks, and I was one of them once upon a time. That is not me. Today, fortunately, with so many different game platforms and social games that we've been hearing so much about today, we've got a much more expanded audience. But I'd like to talk about the good company you're in if you're thinking about using serious games. I'm not going to go through these company names one by one, but I just want to point out the number of government labs, government customers, defense primes, other organizations. These are all in some way government affiliated, and every single one of them is a customer of ours. So these are all people actively using serious games in some way in their organization. So what have we learned working with all of these brilliant people? We've learned two things. Well, the same thing, but from two different perspectives. People don't know what they don't know. It's another restatement sort of what you said earlier. So when we look at building a serious game, what we've learned is that the role of a subject matter expert is intense. Normally an organization comes to us, and when they sit down to negotiate what it's going to mean to work with us on a project, their best experience is creating a training program, maybe an e-learning program. So we really try to get them to understand there's a much greater role for a subject matter expert when we're building a game. Take our medical game, for example. If you're going to create a treatment game, typically you just sort of say, well, if someone's turning a slight bluish color, which of these 5 things does that indicate, or which of these 5 things would you do next? My people need to know, what does a slight bluish color mean? How do I make an animated character, an avatar, look slightly blue? And if you're going to do each of these 5 things, what would be in the room to indicate that you could have that as an option? So we need to dig to a much deeper level than people are used to working at. I don't say that to scare you off, but to try to help you be prepared when you enter into working with a company in these types of activities. They are demanding and they're incredibly rewarding. That goes on the other side as well. The game designer has to understand that when you come in, you may not be as exposed or aware of all of the types and genres of games that are out there that you have to work with. So we also like to ask our customers to trust us to be the good game developers that we are and help guide you through that. Try not to come in with too narrow of a concept of what you want unless you really have that expertise or have worked with people with that expertise to define the idea. Okay. So that's a lot of people. And sometimes people look at that list and they're like, there's no way all those people are using games in their companies. I just don't believe it. How are they using them? So I also like to talk about the fact that while I'm standing here talking about defense games, it really is, there's a lot more out there than just shooters. And we do traditional game design, game development to create those fully immersive, engaging experiences that we've been talking about all day. We can incorporate in social media. We can incorporate in all sorts of dynamics. But that's just one of the many things that we do leveraging game technologies for these customers. We also just will incorporate sort of story or case-driven scenarios into a more traditional simulation game. So you draw a lot of the elements from game design. You make sure those characters are engaging. They can be funny. They can have personalities that help to draw you into the experience, but don't completely leverage all other aspects of a game or a serious game. More and more often, we're actually getting asked to be a visualization or graphical user interface designer for real applications and real systems. Because I've heard it said several times today by other people, but game developers really are brilliant. And I'm not a game designer, by the way, so I can say this about my colleagues. But game designers really are brilliant at designing those interactive experiences, allowing you to see and visualize what a mass of data really means. That's a lot of what you're talking about. They're great at that. They're great at designing systems, making them unique, making them user-friendly. We have to, in the game industry, design things so you can walk up and play. And we're now introducing that to real systems as well. Just utilization of non-player characters or AI, incorporating those into other gaming or other learning elements, having those characters carry over into a simulation or into a game, another thing that we can offer. Lots and lots of lightweight or effects-based modeling, and this is where, when I talk about the sledgehammer versus, your thumb to push and attack, we found that we can, actually we didn't find, Institute for Defense Analysis ran a study using one of the big military simulations, JSAF, alongside Mosby, one of our game-based simulations. They were looking at IED defeat. They were looking at urban tactics for new IED defeat mechanisms. They found that using our tool in a matter of weeks, they could create the same scenario that it took them a matter of months to create in JSAF. They found that when they ran that exercise, they answered about 80 to 90% of the questions they had using the effects-based sim. There wasn't real physics-based modeling. It was just good enough to inspire thinking. But they answered 80 to 90% of their questions in that platform that they also answered in the larger realm. So we really like to talk about lightweight and effects-based tools. Finally, everything we do still has that underpinning of walk up and play, walk up and work, walk up and learn. And all the images around the sides here are some of the entertainment games that my company has made. And I just like to show them to indicate that we're drawing from those experiences and bringing them to our defense and other government solutions. I believe that the final thing that I want to share with you is the biggest thing that we've learned, and we've actually made some not so positive corporate decisions in the past and are recovering from those. When we first started actively as Breakaway working in this market, what we heard from our customers was that they wanted to be able to make their own games. They didn't want to be tied to working with a contractor. They didn't want me to control it. They didn't want to have to come back and pay me every time to change the game or fix the game. We sort of overheard that message, and we started sort of selling an all-tools philosophy. So we always made tools. For our military games, they could build geospatial environments, bringing in their own commercially available or government available data. They could build all their own scenarios. They could run all their own games. We could sell that. We never had to be involved. And we carry that through everything else we do. What we learned was people received it, and they're like, great, this is what I want. And then they suddenly went, oh no, I don't know what to really do with this. And even if they came to training, most of the organizations just weren't staffed appropriately for an individual to get to that level. So what we've learned and what we now practice and what we do is that what people really want is for you to create those initial experiences for them, but provide the tools alongside it so they don't always have to come back. So they can make minor changes, or as they become more advanced, create their own experiences, but not expect them to do that from day one. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today about the things I've learned and the company has learned in our 13 years of making serious games for different government agencies. Thank you.
All right. I'd like to just ask the panel some questions and create some conversation and then get the audience engaged as well. From a little bit of my background, I'll share with you in terms of gaming and serious gaming within the military. 2 years ago, I was tasked to develop a stress inoculation course for the National Guard to support and combat PTSD by developing stress inoculation courses. And when we started doing the research, wow, we had so much inoculation courses to how to kill. And as I'm doing the research, and it's amazing, by the time you have invested in the military to a major in the U.S. Army, you had invested about close to $140,000 to train this major in terms of training and education to do what he or she needs to do to support the U.S. Army in terms of the mission. But when it came to stress inoculation, which I kind of looked at it in terms of investment, of reinvesting into that to, Senator Kennedy used to say, how do we build a Kevlar for the mind? And I'd like to kind of just open that up in terms of, a lot of the things here that we heard was about social games, cultural, indie games. Talk to us a little bit about your experience right now in terms of the movement within military and the different types of styles of gaming they're looking at. Maybe we'll start with Jen.
So it's interesting that we are trying to incorporate more social aspects into a lot of the games that we're offering our customers today. But ultimately, what we really still see, at least coming from the customers, is that they're looking for some combination of a virtual world experience and a serious game experience, often coupling the two. But they're not yet really driving along the same path when it comes to all of the sort of social types of games that we're talking about now and the games for social change. Now, admittedly, that's because most of my customers are interested in training specific skills. They have a dedicated community that they're going to enforce to take that training. So they're not necessarily trying to open up to the broader community. And I know there are lots of movements going on within defense and within other government agencies to explore many more of these social games, Facebook-style games, and the rest. But a lot of what we do is training, so they're less focused on that in our particular case.
Garth?
I don't think I have a lot to offer on that question.
Okay.
I don't see a lot. I just see the little narrow world I've been playing in.
Well, tell us about that world. There's an internal aspect. You talk about that. This is kind of inward-facing, but then it's going to expand and become outward-facing.
Yeah.
How would you see that shift in terms of outward-facing and, say, 2 years from now, what we're doing to prevent piracy?
Okay. If it's successful, or if we do generate insight that we never would have come up before, I can imagine a world where you might play more insight generation games around wicked problems. So we have thought of who, when I said you could put this out, democratize it, anybody could play it or create their own, which is almost sort of where you were ending up. As an example, one thing, potential customers we've thought about, but they're playing the game, but we haven't formally said, hey, would you do this? Because we're sort of at this critical juncture of are we even going to launch. Office and Net Assessment jumped out at us because that's what they do. You guys familiar with them? Andy Marshall's group? They ask hard questions. They're in the business of asking questions that you really don't know the answer to. And Andy Marshall's been like the advisor to the Secretary of Defense for the last since Nixon, long time. And he dreams up very, very difficult questions. So we thought Mowgli would be ideal for them. They've expressed interest. So I could see them doing that kind of thing. The other kind of people we're looking at is there's a group in Navy called Naval Warfare Development Command, and they come up with ConOps. So ConOps is just how you employ technology, and one of those slides had that list of possible uses, and that's another classic example where it is social. You need somebody to sort of take your idea and exercise it in a world. So,
Jim?
Well, I don't have much to offer in terms of the discussion about the military so much as the external purposes of NASA and some other federal agencies who are interested in these very things. They are trying to build relevance around their science content, their missions, of course, as well, and build enthusiasm for students in these younger grades so that they maybe build some resilience or more comfortably imagine themselves becoming scientists or engineers contributing to the purposes and missions of these different agencies. Many of you can look back into middle school and remember your first science fair experience that may have actually turned more students off to science than turned on to science. Or maybe that first algebra course where you suddenly become aware that you are better or are not nearly as good as your friends or your age peers in abstract thinking. But no one's there telling you, oh, just wait a couple years and it'll be there. We lose so many young people in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math fields, way before they've had a chance to think about careers and majors and build some of that resilience that is necessary. I imagine that there are military folks looking to engage younger audiences to think about the many diverse career paths within the militaries too.
No, definitely recruiting and supporting the U.S. Armed Forces is definitely a challenge. And we talked a little bit about audiences, and I think one of the things you brought up, Jim, was almost an accidental finding, is that you're targeting this audience, and then here's a 10-year-old that submits this...
10th grader.
10th grader. 10th grader that... I thought it was 10-year-old. That would have been cooler discussion. But here's a submission that's so sci-fi that he gets invited to come and design some cool things. I mean, let's talk about some accidental findings that you have worked on and that now you're expanding to where you go. I'll give you an example. In 8th grade, I got a grade from my physics teacher, Mr. Clark, that said sell to DARPA. And I got in trouble when I came home. My mom was like, what is this? Is it a D? And I had no idea until the next day. I asked Mr. Clark, I said, Mr. Clark, what is this? And he told me about DARPA in 8th grade. And this is like, in the mid-'80s. So talk to us a little bit about accidental findings.
Well, I'm not even sure it's fair to call it a secondary purpose, but another purpose of real-world, in-world, is to truly sit back and look at what these young people come up with in their designs and their ideas. And those things can often stimulate those professional engineers and scientists or NASA engineers and scientists to say, wow, maybe it doesn't resolve their immediate problem, but it gives them a new idea for another problem they've been working on. And to bring it back to schools for just another moment, I remember 10 years ago, I think Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology here in Fairfax County, a leading high school across the country, became concerned that they had a school full of great test takers who had a lot of difficulty solving problems. And they began to diversify their outreach and start looking for artists who may not have scored well on this entrance exam, but showed other potentials. And it really changed the dynamic of their school. That's another important thing for any federal agency in the military to consider is diversity of thinkers. And there are a number of things that we see starting right around 7th grade, reinforced again in 9th grade, and then again right around 11th and 12th grade. As soon as you get that one extra cut that helps you to self-disqualify yourself as a STEM person, science, technology, engineering, and math person, it's quite comfortable to go off into a liberal arts major and never take a science course again. Or maybe you only take science for liberal arts majors, or never take a math course again except for math for liberal arts. And we lose not only potential candidates for important jobs, we also lose a segment of the voting population who invests in and cares about things that ultimately become important during budgeting times.
So when you're doing this passive style of kind of communication and assessment, just sitting back in a virtual world, seeing them present, seeing them interact, what are some key things that, data points that you're looking for right now?
Well, I mentioned collaboration, and that's also very important for perhaps the opposite reason I just described. We also sometimes see that from a very early age when a young person shows a predisposition to science and technology and math, they're sometimes forgiven for some of their social interactions. And they're left to be on their own. And when they desire to work alone instead of with a lab partner, teachers often let them. And we're discovering that these projects really rein in some of that behavior that's sometimes celebrated as autonomous, but really can be refined to be a terrifically important part of collaborative teamwork.
Great. Jen, do you want to add something?
Sure. I actually have two anecdotes of unintended consequences with two of our products with adults. One is we were working with a group looking at future sensor operations for IED interdiction. I mentioned that earlier. And as part of that group, they actually brought in the individuals who had designed the new sensor systems and created the ConOps, as you said, of what is the concept of operations? How is this going to be used? Is it assigned to a unit? Is it a special task force that gets called in? Is it used in an urban environment or a rural environment? And what we found was, after building out the first scenario, which was just a couple hours of effort, one of those concept guys looked at it and he went, "Oh no." We said, "Yeah, probably wasn't oh no, but that's politically correct." He said, "I just realized that I wasted 6 months." And I said, "Well, what do you mean? Here we were planning to exercise this and teach people how to use them." And what he said was, basically, by seeing this dropped into your system, for the first time I was able to realize it could never be used in an urban environment. And it had something to do with the device that carried the sensor just doesn't make sense to fly over an urban environment. And in all of the collaborative discussions and thinking through and design sessions they had had to that point, they never could just clearly have that jump out at them. So we weren't planning to test anything related to that at all, but in a 2-hour period, he pulled that out as a concept of operations and just scratched it.